Well, it's hello from him,
Richard Moore, and it's hello to her,
Michele Monro. And here we are again, and welcome to our third podcast since launching on Dad's very own YouTube channel.
Indeed.
Very exciting.
Who'd have thought we'd get to number 3, hey? There you go.
I didn't think we'd get to number 2.
Well, absolutely, yeah, well.
But actually, I mean, it's nice. I mean, the channel hosted by Aviator, who, as you know, are based in Hamburg. But what a few people might like to know, it's a world leader in the location in enforcement of audio-visual rights, and is the fast solution to deliver and monetize audio-visual premium digital products. Don't know what that means, but it sounds good.
It does. It basically means that they license material from TV companies to allow us to legally put stuff up on YouTube.
Yes, because we're actually legal.
Yes, yeah, there's an awful lot that isn't.
No, exactly. Now, they've been looking after the channel since we launched in November 2020. I can't believe that. So we were both sad, weren't we, to hear the news that our main point of contact, Lindsay, is stepping down.
Yes.
So absolutely. We both wish him all the best for the future and look forward to welcoming his successor, Christian Klabund. I may have said his name wrong and I apologise. Well, it's that month again, isn't it? Which is really the hardest time of the year for me. It's Dad's anniversary today, and it marks 40 years. I just can't believe that it's been that many years. More years that he's been gone than I actually got to spend with him. That hit me the other night, Richard, and I thought, wow, it's crazy. Then, of course, Mum's anniversary is on the 25th of the month. She left in 2010. And I can't believe that's 15 years.
No, that's incredible. It seems odd to me as well.
Well, in one way, the time drags so slowly. But then again, you blink and the years have racked up. I mean, there isn't a day that goes past that I don't miss them both. And as per my tradition, I still light candles on their special day to remind myself that their light still burns brightly. Everybody has their own way.
Yes, absolutely. And I was very privileged to know your mother as well. And it's and still miss talking about your dad and the conversations we had. It was fantastic to know her.
Well, she was a nice person, much nicer than me. And one question that's come up many times over the 40 years is, where is Dad's ashes? Well, I will tell you now, I mean, first of all, they were at home, although he's in the Book of Remembrance at Golders Green. But actually, one of the things that Dad had written in his will was that his ashes were to be kept until Mum joined him, and then I had to intermingle them before scattering them. The trouble is, neither of them told me where to scatter them. And, yeah, you remember how I agonised over it.
Absolutely, yes.
And I just thought, Shoreditch doesn't seem right. I really felt quite ill about it. And my doctor said to me, just put it out of your mind. You know, you've had your dad there 20 plus years. You know, another year or whatever isn't going to make any difference. And then when the book tour came up and I was visiting, well, virtually went round the world, didn't I? I had to go via Vegas to get to California, and I had this, what they call a light bulb moment, because not only did Mum and Dad renew their vows in Vegas on the little chapel of the West, but Dad had just signed a contract to be resident at the Sands in Vegas, so it had a lot of special memories and connotations to him. So I decided that I would do that. So they're in the Rose Garden outside the chapel in Vegas.
Not that they know about it.
You don't know.
Well, maybe they do now, but
I'm sure they would have laughed about it because, you know, I didn't realise when I was going over by ship, and I'd been away quite a few months before I got to Vegas. Someone then told me it was illegal to spread ashes in any, you know, place of anywhere without permission. And I've thought, well, I'm not going home with them now. So Auntie Marion, who was Johnny Spence's widow, Daddy's first musical director and best friend, she flew over to join me. and we decided to go to the chapel late at night. So we got a taxi and we couldn't find it. They'd moved it. I kid you not. They actually moved it brick by brick. It was on the same road, but apparently where they were was rented, and then the piece of land came up and they bought it. They literally took it brick by brick and rebuilt it. So we found it eventually, and we drove in, and there's a beautiful gazebo under the sort of by the rose garden, and a beautiful tree above it with twinkly fairy lights on it. And we were in there, and I'd had a lot of fans send me candles.
Yes, I was going to mention
So I was
that,
laying... Do you remember?
Yes, I
was
sent one
laying
myself.
them out. Yes, you did. Laying them out on the floor and trying to light them. And suddenly these headlights came in. Well, Marion and Marion was in her 80s, you know.
Yeah.
We were on the floor, going, oh my God. I thought my heart was going to stop. And as it turned out, it was a group of lads who had run across the road to pick up their taxi. So when the car went out, I just got the ashes and took them to the rose garden and went, bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye. Threw them out. Because I wasn't going home with them.
No, quite. After the trouble you had to get them out there in the first place.
Oh, well, me and Marion couldn't stop laughing, of course. And I thought, well, Dad would have loved that. He would have thought it was so funny.
I just remember the hoo-ha you had about actually taking ashes out there in the first place. And
oh, my gosh, you had to have the death certificates. You had to have the cremation certificates. You had to have a certificate to take them overseas.
Yes.
You know, it was so many things you had to abide by. It was lunatic. And yet, because I went from here to Australia, to America, etc., not one person asked to see those papers.
No, well, it's typical, isn't it?
In fact, because I had it in my hand luggage, and not one, person, when I went through security, asked me even what it was.
I had this
crazy, isn't it?
this vision of you going through customs and customs pulling you to one side and saying, "Excuse me, madam, what have you got in this bag?" And you just saying, "Oh, I've got Matt Monro in there,"
Yeah. Oh, one shouldn't laugh, but you have to have these light-hearted moments to make it, bearable.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
The thing is that it was exactly the right place for them. And there's no way once I'd committed I was going to bring them home again.
No.
The thing is also people don't realise how heavy ashes actually are, especially two of them.
Wow.
So I'd had a special bag made, a velvet pouch, because I couldn't lift the box. It wasn't a simple exercise, but I was very pleased. That night, me and Marion had a few glasses of wine. We're just relieved that it was done. And, as I say, he would have laughed anyway. He would have thought it was hysterical. But anyway, that's the answer to everybody who's wanted to know. But there, as I say, he is in Book of Remembrance at Golders Green, if anybody wants to go and pay their respects.
Yes, I think that's led to people thinking that that's where he's been all this time. But not the case.
A lot of people. Well, at the beginning, I didn't tell them he was at home because we brought him home. It's something we promised him in hospital that he would come home, and so we felt that was our way of honouring his wishes.
Yes.
But no, on to cheerier things. As you know, I decided to do a tribute for him. As I said in the book I wrote on his life, and that isn't a plug.
Not yet.
No, it genuinely isn't. But the thing is, he was constantly ignored when it came to big television shows or anything. They always brought someone from overseas in. They seemed to forget that they had somebody right on their doorstep. And after he died, nobody came to me to say we're going to do a tribute. And that really annoyed me. And I actually put up my whole life savings and a lot more to hire the Grosvenor House Hotel.
And a fabulous venue for it as well. It's an incredible room, isn't it, there?
Really, and Daddy had done a lot there, especially with the water rats, which he was a a member of. And yeah, it was the right room, you know. As it happens, it sold out within about, I don't know, 3-4 days. But I couldn't know that at the time.
No.
Mummy went ballistic when I came home and told her that I'd sort of signed my name in blood. But I was just so cross at everybody. And then, of course, on the night, because like ITV had taken a whole table and the Rest Radio and that, and on the night they all said, oh, yeah, we should have done something.
Yeah,
it's always after the event, you know.
And there they were. They'd taken these tables. It's not like they actually then did anything about it. They didn't really report on it or anything like that either, did they? You know, so... But it was a very good job.
It was a lovely night. I was going to say, they didn't come afterwards and say, we'll do a radio show on him or this or that. But it was a wonderful night. And, you know, the top table was just a sprinkling of these amazing names. But I didn't want anyone there just because they were famous. You know, they had to mean something. And Dave Allen, I'll never forget, bless him, because he hated those sort of things.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't have missed it because, you know, Dad was one of his best friends. It was black tie event and Dave turned up in a white tuxedo.
Yeah, that sounds like Dave. Yes. It's no, but it was a good thing you arranged for a videographer, didn't you, to go around and film on the night, which is brilliant because otherwise we'd have no record of this. And so this month, that video that we're putting up on YouTube is actually from that tribute. It's one of the speeches of the night, which was actually given by Bob Monkhouse. And so that was captured on video, but it was also captured very helpfully on audio tape as well. So the sound on the video, yes, you can imagine in these live enormous rooms, wasn't all that brilliant. So I've managed to marry together both the audio tape that there was and the video clip, and so we've now got quite a good copy of Bob's speech on the night, although there is a little bit of video missing, so there's a little bit of section I've just had to put a still there just for just the very end of his speech.
Is there something missing?
Just the very end of his speech. I don't know whether it was the end of the tape that the videographer had or what it was, but just a very, very small section is missing of on the video, but it's there on the audio, so we've got the whole thing complete now. So that's this month's.
But it's funny because on that night, you know, Joe Longthorne, he actually came out and insisted that he be in the cabaret. And the Morpheus choir came, 100 of them, you know, all the way from Wales. And they did a whole medley on Daddy's songs because I didn't want someone there who was going to just sing one of Dad's songs. It wouldn't have been right, you know. Yeah. And just this wonderful array, you know, Les Dawson and... Oh, just wonderful, wonderful people. Barry Cryer, who actually wrote his own poem. You know, it was lovely. And in fact, the same thing happened at the book launch, where I just invited people to come, not assuming in a million years they would turn up. And in fact, as you know, at the first book launch, which was the hardback, I just didn't know I knew the faces, I just couldn't put names. So people were queuing for autograph books and I was saying, sorry, how do you spell your name? And it was fine until someone would say B-O-B. You felt stupid. So when they did the second launch for the paperback, I insisted everybody have name badges. Yes. And if they worked for radio or whatever, you know. And do you remember who walked in with a name badge on?
Oh, Sir George Martin, of all people. As if anybody could wonder who this great man was. But there you go. Yes.
It was like the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, bless him, because George hated those sort of, you know, do's, if you like. Yeah. And I said to him, what are you doing here? And he said, I wouldn't miss it. He said he was my brother. And in he walked, and wonderful.
It's the same
moment. But
it's the same with in the hardback launch. Helen Shapiro came along, and she and her husband John, and that was the same with her. She's retired from the business as such, and she doesn't go to launches and things like that. But before your dad,
they hate them, don't
she
they?
Came along, you know. So it just shows you that the warmth that people had for your dad, you know, was quite.
That's what I mean. It's incredible. And then, as it's the 40th anniversary, only, 2 days ago did we get a brand new tribute sent?
Absolutely, yes. It's just a little one, but it's from the great Dame Shirley Bassey.
Let's listen to it.
40 years on, I still remember Matt with such affection and all the fun times we had together on tour.
Well, actually, I mean, it's wonderful. I couldn't believe it was a bit like Quincy Jones when we did The Boy from Shoreditch.
Yeah.
I wrote asking for a little clip. Not in a million years did I think I'd hear back. Not only did we hear back, he was the first one to do it. Anyway, we wrote to Shirley Bassey by email. I think we got a reply the next day.
Yes, it was. Absolutely,
I mean,
the next day.
You know what? The bigger the star, the more humble.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was really kind of her to do it. It's, she's, even at the age of, I think, 88 now, she's still, extremely busy. And
she's
it's great
a
for her to do it.
wonderful superstar.
Yes.
I still haven't got the story of why Daddy got away with calling her Bert.
No, I did sort of infer that on the email that I sent to her. And I think wondering whether we'd get the story back. No, we didn't get it, unfortunately, so we'll probably never know.
But you've got some good news on Shirley, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely, because a long time ago, in fact, we're talking 2000...
Couple of years.
Well, more than that. 2011 this started. When I was working for EMI Gold, which is obviously the company that used to issue most of your dad's material at the time, and working with Steve Wolf there. He had a set that he wanted to put out for Dame Shirley's 75th birthday, working with a guy called Martin Day who compiled the set. And we put a lot of work into this, and we found some unreleased material, multi-tracks, and I got them mixed down, and the complete Royal Albert Hall concert from the end of 73, which has gone down, is sort of legendary amongst Shirley Bassey fans. And we'd got this in a really good set, and we were ploughing on with it, and we'd sent everything to Dame Shirley, and she'd said, yes, this is great. There was lots of backwards and forwards, but, the general idea was she liked it. We wanted to go out. And then EMI suddenly collapsed in a heap. And, we sort of got a bit of an inkling of that because, first of all, they said, we can't do the live disc. We're going to have to drop the live disc. And it's we've got a few problems there because we're not entirely sure who played in the orchestra on that, which is of course total bunkum because they get a session fee for these things. You don't have to if something's been recorded for record release as it was, you don't have to find out exactly who played. But towards the end,
they were
so it was making excuses just because they thought, what's going to happen? Because the money was disappearing at a great rate of knots from EMI. So then EMI collapsed, and it was taken over partly by Universal and partly by Warner and various things like that. And over the years, I tried on quite a number of occasions to get Warner interested in it, and they would never take the bait. It was, we've already got this compilation and that compilation. I said, but it's not quite the same because this is material that hasn't been out before. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it. But we couldn't get anywhere. And then, once again, thanks to your dad, I was working with Cherry Red on the complete EMI recordings, which is his later recordings from 1971 onwards. And happened to mention to them that I'd worked on this Shirley Bassey set. And they said, ooh, that sounds interesting. So we set the wheels in motion, and I wrote to Dame Shirley again, and she said, well, it's been a while, can I hear the tracks again? So I sent those off to Monaco. I got a phone call from her lovely PA, Victoria, who said, Dame Shirley loves them. Yes, she's really happy to go put them out. We sent all the appropriate permissions to Warner, and then it took Warner's 2.5 years to actually clear this set. It's taken an age.
Not only did they talk about paint drying, I actually painted my house and watched it dry in the meantime.
So finally, after 13 years since it should have been released, it's coming out in April. I don't
What's
know.
The title? Have you decided
the title
yet?
is The Singer, which is actually one of the unreleased tracks on the album. We thought that was quite an appropriate name for it.
That's a great title.
Yeah.
So are Cherry Red bringing it out then?
Yes, Cherry Red are bringing it out, and it's available. I don't normally plug stuff on this, but why the hell not? It's available from their website and pre-order already.
Yeah, but when's it coming out?
Oh, 18th of April.
Right, there we go, you see. Well, if you can't plug something on our own channel...
I know, but there you go. Anyway...
Talking about plugs,
yes.
We got a lovely surprise on Christmas Day, didn't we?
We did indeed, yes.
Well, I didn't. I was told about it, so I actually want to thank all the fans who sent me texts and emails to let me know that I'd missed the new feature-length film on Wallace and Gromit called Vengeance Most Foul. Now, you know this, but the movie follows Top Dog Gromit as he springs into action to save his beloved owner when Wallace's newest invention, which was the smart gnome, goes rogue and he sees himself framed for crimes he didn't commit. And then Dad can be heard singing Born Free on the radio in the Gnome Improvements van after Feathers McGraw steals it. It was fabulous. And to add icing on the cake, it aired again on BBC on the 3rd of January. So if anybody missed it and wants to watch it, you can watch it on BBC iPlayer or Netflix, you know. It was wonderful. A really nice surprise because people never, I'm not told by the record companies in advance that, this one came to them or that one didn't. I literally find out from fans. The thing is that most people approach the record companies. They don't need to ask my permission to use something in a project. I mean, do you remember The Exception, which was that, what was it called? Funny Woman.
Funny Woman, yes.
Which aired in 23. Now, halfway through the first episode, the lead character goes to see Daddy at the talk of the town. So Dad's mentioned quite a few times, and then he can be heard singing Walk Away. The production company did contact me the year before because they wanted photographs and background material. So, that was a rare instance where I actually found out that it was going to be in something. But yeah, it was lovely.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you often find out that he's being used in an advert just by a fan letting you know. Or you happen to be watching telly one night and suddenly hear your dad's voice and hang on, I didn't know about that one.
Well, it's amazing how many times they use Born Free.
Yes.
Whatever advert, it's always Born Free. And in fact, it was Dad's first single for Capitol Records.
It was.
And the one he's always going to be associated with it, isn't he?
Even though, it's never really been a hit.
It hasn't. Well, the thing is that it's an interesting story, actually, because the producer, Carl Foreman, he'd forged with Columbia to film Born Free because it was based on the true life best-selling book written by Joy Adamson about her game warden husband and Elsa, who was the most beautiful orphaned lioness that they raised while living in Kenya. It had been published in 1960, but it was translated into 21 languages. So from Carl Foreman's point of view, it seemed an obvious choice for conversion to celluloid. And John Barry's choice for the lyrics was Don Black. They'd collaborated on the Thunderball movie. Mm-hmm. And then Barry made the decision that the lyrics should focus on the freedom theme. And so Don went to work and they liked the piece and that was it. But Foreman didn't like it. He hated the song and he felt the lyrics should centre around, the lions themselves. Well, Barry somehow persuaded the producer to stick with his vision. Both Don and Barry thought the sincerity and tenderness of Dad's voice would be the right instrument for the piece, so he joined the team. But as you know, the experience proved to be very fraught for all three of them. And it was all to do with this Sam Jaff, who was the day-to-day producer. He had his own thoughts about how the rest of John's score would fit in the film, and his vision was for the music to blast through with the introduction of the animals, and John was adamant that it wasn't the case, and he got on the phone to Foreman and said, begged him, please prevent a crisis, so to speak. So Foreman did, and Barry's score was put in the film the way it was intended, but he beset the project with problems and he kept changing his mind on whether the film should even have a title song. So Barry and Black fought their battle well and thought they'd won the war, but they were in for an unpleasant shock.
And it had a royal premiere at home with the Queen, our Queen, that is. And I was invited to the royal premiere. And on the day of the premiere, they dropped the last reel of the film and fractured the film. And the only other copy of the last reel was one which didn't have my soundtrack on it.
For heaven's sake.
So that was a very, very disappointing evening for me, except that I got to meet the Queen anyway for the first time. And then it came over here, the film came over here. And for a long time, the soundtrack wasn't included in the film. My soundtrack wasn't included in the film because I believe, I'm not sure whether I may be completely wrong, and if I am, I apologize to Miss Joy Adamson, but I believe, or I was told that Joy Adamson didn't want a pop song written about her story, which is Born Free. I can understand it, I suppose, in many ways. When you've written a true story, which it is, and somebody... It seems as if somebody is cashing in on your success, sort of thing, you know. But I don't think the song detracts from the film at all. I think because it's over the closing credits for a start, and I think the song is very descriptive of the story.
Well, what really happened, of course, was that Mum, Dad and John Barry attended the royal premiere in London, and Daddy was really anxious and excited about anticipating the reception it would receive. He posed for the press, he answered the questions, and he sat down to watch the film. And it wasn't long before Don Black received a rather anguished call from Dad telling him they'd cut the song from the movie. Now, Carl Foreman approached Daddy in the lobby after the film's closing credits, and he apologised and explained that they dropped the first movie reel and fractured the film, so the soundtrack had to be omitted. But the truth was that he thought it was in the film's best interest to drop it. He didn't like to lose an argument, so he'd gone back into the cutting studio without telling anybody and re-edited the film, removing the song and replaced it with an orchestral version. Well, you can imagine, Richard, the trio were apoplectic, and they were soon on the phone to the producer to read the right act, but Foreman wouldn't budge. But as it transpired, there's a bit of luck, because the Americans loved it. And within weeks of the release, Born Free, as covered by the pianist Roger Williams, was #1 in the American charts, and that was the mantra from heaven that Foreman couldn't ignore. And of course, Columbia could see dollar signs. But there was a slight problem. Now, I don't know whether any of our listeners know this, but for a song to be eligible for an Academy Award, it has to feature in every print of the film. So the heads of Columbia, the publishers, Screen Gems, and the producers fought to reclaim every piece of celluloid that had been distributed so as to put the song back in. And of course, they added significant resources to launch the campaign behind it. Well, of course, in 1966, both the song and Barry's score were nominated for Academy Awards. So while Don was in Hollywood attending the Academy Awards, Dad was choked because he hadn't been invited to attend or even sing the song, which you can imagine he was gutted about. And Don was so wrapped up with the possibility of receiving an Oscar that he'd overlooked pushing for Dad's appearance on the show, and they used Roger Miller's instrumental version instead. But he did send a photo of Dean Martin awarding him with the Oscar and signed it, "For Matt, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be in this picture. Donzy." Well, interesting, it was the first British partnership to scoop the Academy Award for Best Film Song since the awards were inaugurated 39 years prior, which is incredible when you think about it. Because Born Free became one of the most successful songs of the century, and despite popular belief, it didn't chart in the UK.
Born Free was the #1 hit in practically every country in the world, most of them by me. And I don't think it ever got into the top 30 in this country.
Why was that, do you think?
I think because the selling was done over a long period, because we had very good sales on it. But it was done over a long period of time. It's, as you know, my audience is not the teenage audience that rushes out and buys up hundreds of thousands of records.
But yeah, the recording's a little bit interesting as well, really, for the single. It was Matt's first recording for Capitol under his new contract. And George Martin had been his producer all for the previous 5 years, all of the time when he was at Parlophone. And George had, at that point, resigned from his position as A&R manager of Parlophone and was starting up his own production company called Air. And at this particular point, he wasn't available anymore to Matt to record at Abbey Road Studios. You know, it was sort of like, oh, well, you've left now, you can't do anything here. So the single, which was Born Free, and its flip side, which was a song called Other People, were produced by Ron Richards. And I think that's the only time Ron actually produced your dad, because there are actually so very few producers who ever did work with your dad. I mean, George worked with him the most. John Burgess obviously worked with him later on. I think Peter Sullivan did one session, and Ron Richards is the only other person to have produced the English language. I mean, when we go to Spanish, it's a little bit more difficult because there's Leonardo involved, but and often that was in tandem with somebody else, with Leonardo. But it was.
Well, I mean, I have to give George Martin absolute, amazing acclaim, if you like, and loyalty, because Daddy came first before the Beatles, and even when George took the Beatles, he wouldn't get rid of Dad.
No, well, quite. Yeah,
he could have easily passed him on to another producer. I'm too busy kind of thing, but he never would, and he never did.
And by the time Matt came back to the UK to record again, George was then free to work with whoever he wanted to. And of course, as Matt was coming to the UK and he was organising his own sessions pretty much, whilst he was in the UK under the Capitol contract, he was able to say, George, do you want to come and do this? And so he was able to work with George again, which was useful. Yes, of course, I'm forgetting Dave Kavanagh in America, of course, as well, for Capitol.
Oh, in America, yeah. Yes. But, I mean, they were called the Three Musketeers, weren't they? Johnny Spent, George and Daddy.
Yes.
And they were a fantastic team. Absolutely. I mean, it's such a shame Johnny died so young,
Indeed, yeah.
I mean, not only was he Dad's best friend, but they just clicked together. Everything made sense. That's not to say he didn't have great musical directors after, but I don't think anybody could step into the shoes of Johnny.
No, it was that bond, it was that friendship between them, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, you could pass through the recording studio, look through the window, and George, Johnny and Dad would be corpsing on the floor, because of one of their silly jokes.
Oh, yes, yeah, and there's bits of that survive on some of the session tapes as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's just too funny. And George, he liked to sort of go in the studio and be very, business as usual sort of thing. But he decided, do you remember when he decided to do the night session instead of a daytime?
Yes.
And they went out for dinner first. And they all got legless.
Although saying that it was a brilliant session.
Well, that was it, because he did a sort of jazz number, which was so not like him, and
Absolutely.
he smashed it. I love it.
Yes,
the wrong time.
The wrong time, yeah.
And it wasn't. It was completely the right time. But yeah, they never worked in the evening after that. That was too fun.
They'd perhaps never got anything done if they had, yeah.
Well, this is it, yeah. I mean, George wanted Dad to go with him to do the Le Mans.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were both so into cars and everything. And, of course, he didn't realise that they had to give up a week to do it, which they couldn't do. So their dreams were dashed before it started. But, they would have loved to have done something like that together.
And, of course, he was a proper producer. And we were talking last month about AI, weren't we?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's how it's working its way into popular culture. And here we are doing a podcast, and I'm going to talk about another one that I've been listening to that I found fascinating. They've resurrected digitally Michael Parkinson, and it's quite an interesting concept, because whilst it's I thought it's going to be somebody asking the questions and they're going to replace the voice, just like we were talking about last month. But actually, it's the computer is listening to the answers and coming up with new questions. Obviously, they've got lots of information, research has been done in the first place, but it's actually the computer that is thinking about it all. It's thinking about what question to ask next, and that, it has become the interview. It's nobody's actually adding anything into it, which I find is it's slightly disturbing in some ways. But it's also interesting because after they've played the interview, the three creators of the podcast, which includes Mike Parkinson, who is Michael's son, actually discuss all about their process and why they're doing it. And it's interesting, Mike said that he didn't want it to be an exact blueprint of his father at the end of the day if it was asking the questions. If it came up with a different way of doing things, a different way of talking, but just using his father's voice, he was fine with that because he didn't want it to see it as his father in a box. He wanted to really see it just as a computerized version.
But of course, Michael had done hundreds and hundreds of talk shows. So literally, he must have actually vocally spoken every word in the English language virtually. So it's quite easy then to put something together.
Oh, yes.
You know what I mean?
You train the machine to do these things.
Yeah. Whereas someone like Dad, who didn't, yes, of course he did a lot of interviews, but they were the same questions over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
He said, is anyone ever going to ask me something original?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Unfortunately, when he was doing press conferences in like the Philippines, he'd literally have one after the other coming in the studio, and every question was identical.
Yes, and I can imagine. Just imagine what it's like for anybody really in that situation. I'm sure Paul McCartney and George Harrison and Al got totally fed up with the question, when are the Beatles getting back together? Which they must have had every interview for about 30 years.
Whereas the Spice Girls probably have the same, and then ABBA, and although they technically did get back together, again by AI.
So it's then, absolutely, with Now and Then that they did last year, which was, we say AI.
With the holographs.
Yeah, it wasn't really AI in the same way of Michael Parkinson, though, because this was AI in a different form, because this was restoration. This was being able to extract John's voice from a fairly low quality cassette, and it's something I've done with your dad as well. There's a few things within the Capitol remasters that I did a couple of years ago and on the complete EMI set, which have used the same sort of technology, perhaps not as advanced as the version that they have, but the same sort of technology to allow me to rebalance things, to allow me to make a stereo mix of something that wasn't previously available, by being able to take a stereo mix of a backing track that happened to exist, because there's no multi-tracks for it anywhere. It's to take the backing track that happens to exist, but you can extract his vocal from a mono version of that song and slot it back into the stereo backing track mix, and you create a stereo version of the song for the first time. And then on the EMI set for Cherry Red, the live tracks on the end of it weren't particularly well balanced, so I was able to actually rebalance the various parts of the band and make it sound a little bit more pleasant. Of course, a lot of these things, we've got quite a lot in the archive of things that have come from sound desks at concerts, but they're not, the tape that you get from there is not meant to be released. It's just being run off by the engineer as something to give to your dad after the concert, which is why we ended up with 3 or 4 of these things, and why we ended up with Manila and the Hong Kong concert, because they're just given as a present. Oh, we thought you might like to have this, So, and your dad was keen enough to keep these things, which was nice. Although I bet he never listened to them.
No, he didn't. He didn't often listen to his own stuff. In fact, it was very funny. He was doing a concert or theatre show with Bob Monkhouse, and he'd just been delivered the acetate for a new album.
Oh, yes.
And Bob walked in, and Dad had literally his head in his hands and listening to the music. And Bob went, "What on earth's the matter, Matt?" He said, "Oh, Bob," he said, "my voice sounds tinny. It's awful. I'm really upset." And Bob walked over to the record player, which happened to be leaning on one of those tin ashtrays, took it out, and he said, "Is that better, Matt?" And he went, "Oh, yeah, that is better." But that was like the first or second album. And then, of course, in those days, it was so much excitement about getting it. You wanted to listen to it straight away, you know.
Well, that leads us nicely into full circle, really, because we started talking about Bob at the near the beginning of the podcast. And yeah, we've been going on a bit this week. We were a bit longer than we normally were. I hope we haven't outstayed our welcome. Next month, we've already actually thought about what we're going to do next month. We've had a couple of letters come through. So next month, we're going to have a bit of a discussion about Matt's movie songs. And
thank you to Anthony. We haven't forgotten you. Thank you for your email. But we've been inundated with questions, and we will address yours next month.
And of course, if you have any questions or comments or stories about Matt, please do let us know. The email address is pod@mattmonro.com. What is it, Michelle?
pod@mattmonro.com.
That's the one. Okay, so remember, send along to that, and hopefully it could be your message that we feature in a future episode.
Yes, and don't forget, we're looking for photographs, audios, videos, anything that you've got sitting in your loft or you've found somewhere in an archive. Please send them on. We're desperate to have something turn up out of the blue.
Absolutely, and of course, if something does turn up, we'd like to try and, particularly video, we'd like to be able to share it with you as well on our YouTube channel if we possibly can, if we can possibly clear these things. That's about all for this month, I think.
Well, it's goodbye from him, Richard Moore.
And it's goodbye from her, Michelle Monro. Goodbye.
See you next month. Bye.